Welcome back. What I want to do is go over today how to do an exam on Blackboard. So you start out by going to assessments, and actually let me see if I can I'll go ahead and do my current class and then I can remove it. So I'm going to tell it that I want to create a test, and we're going to call this, got to create a new one. So we're going to say create a new one. And I'll call this demo exam. And then if I want to tell the students something, I can say something like, this exam demonstrates how to use Blackboard to make an exam. And under instructions, I'll put things like, you have 1 hour. You will need to keep a backup copy of your work to document that you did the problems. And I'll show you how to have them upload that later. And then let's see, other instructions. So that's pretty much it. All that's going to do is that's just going to create kind of a placeholder for this exam. And so now, okay, here's my test canvas, and I get to make a demo exam. So if you've used questions before, you can find a question set that you've used in the past. You can create a question set from previously stored questions. I'm going to operate under the assumption that most of you will be creating new questions. So we'll go to create a question, and we'll just go through some of the types. Some of these are easier to use than others. Obviously, the true-false is pretty easy. So, all right. So question title, I'll just call it question 1. Question text, the sky is blue on a clear day in Lubbock. Okay, and then we'll come down and we have to tell it, do we want the orientation to be vertical or horizontal? We'll pick vertical. And what's the correct answer? And the correct answer is true. Then you have the opportunity to, if they give the correct answer, give them some feedback. You can do that or not. So you could say, you are correct. And under the incorrect response feedback, you can say something that gives them some feedback if they answered incorrectly. Now, I don't do this because a lot of times I will schedule my tests over a range of time. So I wait until everybody has submitted the test before I give the students feedback on whether their work was correct or incorrect, and before I show them the correct answer. So it's a matter of personal preference. If you want to give incorrect feedback, we could say something like, the sky is indeed blue. Okay. You have the opportunity to add a certain category, assign a topic, assign a level of difficulty, assign some keywords, and you can add notes to yourself. So we'll say submit and create another. And so now we'll do a multiple choice. So actually, let me go back because I have to actually go back all the way to the main screen. So here's what my instructions and description are going to look like. So far, I've told it 10 points. Here's my true false. And so now what I want to do is I want to create a question and I want to create a multiple choice. So once again, system is slow. Okay, we'll call this question 2. We will say something like elements that are in series have the same. Okay, and then I'm going to give them some choices. So I'm going to come down here. It's got some options. I'm going to tell it to number the answers with lowercase. I'm not going to allow partial credit in this case, and I'll put my orientation vertical. The minimum number rather of answers that you can have is 4, so you can't do a multiple choice with 3. Right now, you'll see that it has answer number 1 marked as correct. So what was my question? Elements that are in series have the same, let's first say voltage. That's actually not correct. For answer 2, let's say current, and that one is correct. For answer 3, let's say power. And for answer 4, let's say none of the above. Okay, so we'll submit that one. Oh, and I can give them correct response feedback and incorrect response feedback once again. So you can do that or not. So let's submit that one. And then finally, let's do one more. We'll do a short answer. Let's call this question 3. And let me say Ohm's law. Let me say, what relationship does Ohm's law define? And then when the question presents, they will have the opportunity to get an answer. Now I can, and actually let me go back because let me show you kind of something that you can do. Let's say state, let's ask them to state Ohm's law. No, it doesn't want to let me, change it. Here we go. State Ohm's law. And then down here at the answer, let me tell it V equals IR. So it's going to do a limited amount of grading. And there is some forgiveness on things like case sensitivity and so on the answers. But I've always found that it is possible for students to enter answers that are correct that the system doesn't recognize as being correct. So if I define test questions like this, I always go back and grade them manually. So we're going to submit that. And we are going to, I think we're done. So we have 3 questions. I have assigned, it defaults to assigning each one 10 points. I can use a different number of points per question, or I can use a different number of total points. So I could select and tell it 20 points. Now notice that my total number of points is 40 because it just reassigned 20 points to the first question. So here's the point total over here. So if you want to give different number of points to different questions, that works fine. Okay, so now push OK in the lower right hand corner, and it has created my test. It's going to save it under demo exam. And so I'm going to tell it to submit. Okay, now it's going to give me some test options. So right now I'm going to say no, do not make this available to students. It's going to tell me, do I want to show the instructions to students before they begin the test? Yeah, that's often a good idea. It's going to ask me if I want a new announcement to go out for this test. And then it's going to ask me, do I want to allow multiple attempts? So if I don't want to, if I want just one answer per question, I'm going to leave this blank. That's what I usually do. But you could give them 2 attempts. If you give them 2 attempts, it's going to save both attempts. And then, you can look at the first one and the second one. see what modifications they made, and so on. So usually I don't give multiple attempts. If you do give multiple attempts, you have to tell it how do you want it to score. Do you want it to score? Let's just really briefly do this. Do you want it to score? Do you want it to take the highest grade, the lowest grade, the first attempt, the last attempt, or the average? So you have the option to, if you're going to give them multiple attempts to answer the question, you can determine which one counts. Forced completion is pretty important because if you don't click forced completion, then it allows students to leave and come back. So it's always a challenge on academic dishonesty to be sure that that you're creating minimal opportunities for students to be cheating. So I always click force completion, and I also always set a timer. And I also always set auto submit, which means when they get to 60 minutes, the exam submits. And this is why I do this, because numerous times I've had students come and tell me a story that they, submitted, and for whatever reason, the system didn't take their submission, and by the time they figured out how to do it, the time had expired. So if you let the system auto-submit at the expiration of time, then you sort of negate that argument. Okay, and it tells me when do I want to display, do I want to remove it from the display or not. It also asks me, do I want to restrict location? And so I could tell it, that I want one of the testing center, or I want to put some range of IP addresses so that I limit them to a certain location. You can also require a password to access the test. If you want to make availability exceptions, you can do that, and you can also make exceptions for time and so on. So, but we'll do that after the fact. And then there's a due date. So normally what I do, and it's completely up to you, given that we don't have live classes now, you could actually set the exam to run during the time that the students would have normally been in class. So I can basically make the test available at the time that class would start on a certain day, and then I could set the due date to be that same day, 1 hour and 20 minutes later, or 1 hour later. So that's a possibility. It's also a possibility to give them a time range, which is what I often do, especially in my graduate classes. So I might say the test will become live at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you must submit by 10, but you only have an hour and a half. So in that case, the due date would be whatever the date was at 10 p.m. And the display would run beginning 4 or 5 or 6 hours prior. On the timer, I don't think there is a maximum limit here, so I think you can give them 4 or 5 hours. All right, so the way I have this set up, if the student were taking the test, they would have a range of times over which to take the test. They would have a limit, though, once they started on how long they could go, and then they would also not be able to stop and restart at a different time. So they'd have to finish the test in one sitting. So that's usually the way I do it, but not necessarily always. All right, show test results. So I actually do not ever show scores or answers until after after the availability end date, after the attempts are graded, or after the due date. Usually I'll set it for after the due date. And then at that point, so of course, obviously that would mean I would have to set a due date. At that point, I will show them the score, I will show them the answers. I can choose whether or not to show them feedback. This is just another option. So I could say, for example, after all attempts are graded, maybe then I want to show the feedback. So you have two logic statements there, what you want to do and when you want to do it. I generally opt for the test presentation all at once, but you can certainly show one question at a time, and then you can also select to prevent backtracking, meaning Once they submit an answer and move ahead to the next question, they cannot go back and change their answer, even if they haven't submitted the exam yet. Typically, I just present the entire test all at once because that's what they're normally used to in a face-to-face class. You also have you have the option to randomize the questions, but unlike a lot of publisher software, this only randomizes the questions as they have a new attempt. So it won't necessarily randomize the questions for the different students. It just randomizes the order. And I don't know if in Blackboard there's a way to choose test questions from a test bank. I think you can. I normally have not done that in the past because it's really pretty labor intensive, as you see, to make out these exams. All right, so we'll submit that. And then what you're going to see is it's going to show up in my Blackboard menu, but it will not be visible to the students because I haven't yet made it available. So if we come down here, here's my demo exam, and notice right here it says availability item is hidden from the students. So unless you want the students to be able to open the exam, be sure that you see that when you first post this, and also be sure that at the date and time that you say it's going to be available, it actually becomes available. All right, so let's click on that and see what happens. It'll let me pretend to take the exam. It tells me I have an hour. It tells me I have a time limit of 1 hour. It tells me what all is going to go on. It tells me it has forced completion. So the reason to be sure that this all displays the way you want it is so that students can't come later and say, I didn't understand, I had an emergency and I had to stop, or I had to go to another class and I thought I could finish. Also, be aware that you do have to click 2 buttons in order to actually begin the test. You have to click the button on the actual Blackboard page, and then you have to click begin. So the I accidentally clicked a button isn't really going to work as an excuse. I have heard that one a lot. I accidentally started the test without meaning to. In fact, I even put in my instructions, do not begin the exam until you are completely ready because I will not allow you to restart. Okay, so here's my exam. The sky is blue on a clear day in Lubbock. I'll say false. And I'll give the correct answer here. And I'll give the V equals IR here. And let's save and submit. Okay, they even ask you, are you sure that you want to submit? So once again, no sympathy for the I accidentally clicked the submit button because they actually prompt you and say, click cancel to return, click OK to submit. So we're going to say OK. And then basically it gives me a message that I completed the exam, and I can click OK to review the results. So notice that basically it doesn't really tell me anything about what happened on the exam because I have it set not to reveal until all exams are graded. It does tell me that the status is it needs graded, my grade is not available, and it won't become available until I go back and fix my due date, etc. So that's that. That's the environment that the students face in doing exams. Now, the other thing you can do, let me go back. Once you've done the exam, you do have the ability to edit. You can edit the test or you can edit the test options. So if you have a student in your class that needs extra time, there is a way to do that, and I may not. So test availability options. I think I can pick a student and say, and once I pick a student, it'll let me change the time. If you have a specific question on that, please don't hesitate to ask, and I'll search that out because I know it's possible to do, and I know once you figure it out, it's really pretty easy to do. So I'll figure that out. Anyway, so if I want to edit this, let's say I decided that I need to add an extra question. So I can do that from this menu. This is edit the test options. So I can edit things like due date. If I want to actually edit questions, then I go back to the home page. And I'm sorry, this is really super slow. So it's going to go back to the home page. I'm going to go back and find my exam. And now I'm going to tell it to edit the test. So now what it's going to do is it's actually going to edit the questions, or allow me to edit the questions. So now I can add an additional question. I can change how much the questions count, and so on. The upload questions is if you're working in a learning management system that is that works with the Blackboard site. Blackboard at Texas Tech says that they can do uploads. I've had trouble getting that to work, so I would refer you to the Blackboard staff if you want to upload questions. All right, let's go back then to, the main screen. And let's talk about what happens if you want to give an exam in a conventional manner, or if you're requiring students to submit a hard copy of their work after they take the exam. So what you have to do there is you have to create another tab and you have to do an assignment. And so call it work for demo exam. And now what you can do is you basically, when the students see this, they have the ability to upload a file. And so that's what they're going to do. So you just give them some number of points and you tell it to submit. And so if I now go to this work for demo exam and I click on that, it's going to give me the option to either write my submission, which no one should do, or to attach a file. Okay, so what the students want to do is they want to do their work by hand, or using software, or whatever kind of question you're asking. They want to do that, and then they want to use their smartphone with an app called CamScan or a similar scanner app. That'll allow them to take a photo of their work, and usually if it's a decent cell phone, it comes out to be a clear and good photo. It'll allow them to take a photo of their work, save as a PDF, email it to themselves, pull it from email, and upload it to Blackboard. That's about a 15-minute process. I usually give about a 3-hour delay between when the test is actually submitted via the online test and when I require them to have their hard copy of their work uploaded. So typically I would not be asking, obviously, questions like, is the sky blue in Lubbock? I'd be asking students to do something like solve a circuit. If they write out their work and get their answer and answer the question, then but by the time they finish the exam, they have anywhere from 2 to 3 hours to take the snapshots of their work, get it into a PDF, and get it uploaded onto the system. That can be a little bit tricky the first time the students do it, so that's why I give them 2 or 3 hours after the exam. Ideally, probably you'd only need 15-20 minutes. Okay, so that is that on how I run tests in Blackboard. And hopefully, there are some tricks you can use. Blackboard will allow you to see when the student started and stopped the test. And I'm pretty sure you can track an IP address of where they were taking the exam. So you can do things like look and see if people start and stop at exactly the same time. Do they have the same errors on the same questions? And if they have submitted written work, obviously you can look at that as well. So hopefully this was helpful.